Winter. Chapter 6. Clutching the witch's abandoned veil, I walked the dungeon-like halls and staircases of the castle until I opened a door on the first floor to find a bed made up and my own trunk sitting at its foot, just as at the inn. It was a spacious room with bright windows set deep into the thick outer walls and a person-sized fireplace stoked high. The bed itself was something strange and small, raised up on a plinth with a series of steps going up to it, and heavy drapes hanging all around. But the most remarkable thing was that all the walls had been painted with an interlacing pattern of vines and leaves and flowers. Faded green on white wash, the branches swept up the walls and onto the beams in bursts of rose and peony and muckwood blossom to nestle in between the timbers. Set amongst them were knights and women in medieval dress, shields and swords in hand. I went around in wonder, touching the faded paint, looking at the tiny brush strokes still fixed in the plaster, the mark of a hand that had been dead and withered for centuries gone. It wavered on the line between beautiful and terrifying. No different, I told myself, than my mother's painted silk wall hangings, or the vast battle scenes displayed in our formal dining room. But it unsettled me, the tangling vines, the strange flat eyes of these ancient people. Only the swatch of plaster over the fireplace was bare. Then I realized it was not undecorated, but rather the decorations had been chipped away, just as Protestants had hacked the saints off church walls. From what remained of the paint, it looked to have once been a coat of arms. Only the curl of a fleur-de-lis and the lost angle of a chevron left their mark. I touched a finger to the coarse plaster. Bristles of horsehair sprouted from the raw surface. "Will you be wanting a meal, my lady?" I turned to find a woman in the centre of the room. From where she had come, I couldn't say. Average height, average build, everything about her seemed entirely calculated to be unremarkable. She wore the apron and shoes of a servant, the housekeeper, perhaps. The great ring of keys the size of my hand, hanging from her waist, confirmed it. "Oh yes, if it's no bother." "Doesn't come into it, my lady. I will bring up a tray." She began to leave, and I called out without meaning to, "Wait, don't go." Turning back to me, her face was placid and indifferent. "What I mean to say is, you haven't told me your name." "Wolf." "Wolf?" "Ursula Wolf, my lady." I disliked the answer as much as I misliked her name. "Do you live in a castle?" A small smile at that. "Oh, no, my lady. The staff live in the village. It is only yourself and the mistress who will stay here overnight." "And where is the village? I couldn't follow our route here." Wolf considered her words. "You're right. It is quite an out-of-the-way place." "Perhaps if I could see a map?" "There are no maps. If you want it here, you're likely to find your way. If not—" Her vagueness unsettled me. I chewed over the question. I'd wanted to ask the witch the whole journey here, but hadn't had the courage to. I leaned towards her, lowering my voice as though confessing to a priest. "Please tell me, what exactly am I to do? What did my predecessors—" "Meals will be brought to your room 3 times a day," said Wolf, as though I hadn't spoken. "You're free to leave the castle. The doors are never locked, but beware, the forest around these parts is treacherous." "I know my way round the forest quite well, thank you." Her cold eyes held no humour in them. "Things are different here, my lady. You do well to take care." I shivered. "Would you like me to bring more wood for the fire?" "Just something to eat, thank you." She left, with no curtsy, though I reminded myself I didn't care about such things. I could run now. The castle was an empty horror. No one could see me if I simply left and took my chances on foot. Then I thought of the twisting holloway that climbed the mountain, the close-gathered trees meeting over the sunken road, the confusing geography that made me feel strange and dizzy if I tried to hold it on my mind. No, I must take my chances here. I wasn't sure if Wolf would act as a lady's maid, and expect to unpack my clothes herself, so I left them for the time being and started with my books and papers and carefully wrapped specimens. There was no bookshelf, but a handsome writing desk was pushed up against the wall beneath the windows, so I lined up my volumes there and organized my my research papers alongside. I had begun reading on the new techniques used to track time and soil strata, and I thought to continue my study without my stepmother's disapproving looks. My specimens I took special care in packing. I had insisted on bringing the large, grid-like piece of storage my mother had commissioned for my 12th birthday. That year, before she died, she had begun to take notice of my interests, as though I was a curious spectacle in her own home she could pass the time with. Worked out of polished beech, backed in green baize, the case took the shape of a large square, about 2 meters by 2 meters, and split up by means of horizontal and vertical partitions into 400 individual squares of space. Modeled after a pharmacist's cabinet, each slot was home to a different specimen of rock. I had arranged them into columns of igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic, marking out the strange birth and life of each piece. Matte panes of grey slate shot through with threads of white, a polished square of granite, freckled amber, a lump of diorite, dimpled like a Dalmatian, snags of pyrite as gold and shiny as a fennec. At the centre of it all, a geode of the size of both palms together, a smooth egg of rock split open and the two halves displayed side by side to show the crystalline hollow within. White at the outside, bleeding to blue and purple, I had always thought the crystals looked like teeth. A beautiful maw waiting to clamp shut. My father had first gifted me a sharp flake of flint when I was 7, but he had given me more than that. It was somewhere to belong. The earth spread out from my feet to the feet of every other living thing on earth, one endless rocky blanket, fathoms deep and century-old. I was at home where it ruptured out of the ground into mountains and cliffs, raw rippled insides in display, rock-packed heights in striations, crumbling like cheese, or glossy like water. Out there, it didn't matter if I was wanted or not. Out there, I would always be enough. When I was finished, I stretched my back and went to the windows to let in a breeze. A good half-meter in depth, they felt like tunnels between the underworld of the castle and the bright day outside. I thought about pulling some of the pillows and blankets from the bed and making myself a reading nook. It would feel better to be only a breath away from nature. The view was beautiful. Straight down the valley, the plains of the forest top flanking the hillsides, and, in the distance, the shape of peaks. I wondered where the village we had stopped at was from here. Down the valley, surely, but I couldn't see smoke rising from fires or any opening in the trees. It was like the wild wood had swallowed up the rest of the world, and I was stranded, an anchorite in the most remote wilderness. The meal was simple, far plainer than what I was used to in Blumwald, but it was hot and filling, and I was grateful for it. While I ate, Wolf looked over my close trunk and tottered before declaring she would find a girl in the village who could do for me. I wondered if Wolf worked alone or whether a girl from the village did for the washing and scouring. I almost protested that I was quite capable of dressing myself. Then I thought about rejecting another chance for company and stayed quiet and let Wolf make her plans instead. There was plenty of the day still left, so I set myself exploring, first retreating my route back to the dank, echoing cave of the hall, and then in careful loops to trace the flow of corridor and staircase. I began to draw the outline of a map on a piece of scrap paper, but the castle seemed to defy geometry. From the outside it was clearly square, but inside I found myself turning 5 corners to complete a loop of the building. When I tried to order the lines and angles, I felt sick, a pressure building in my temples. I'd always found my way walking from the ground beneath my feet, the touch of the tree bark, the smell of moss, or the sound of birdsong. I would do the same here. The hall was cold. That was the first landmark I fixed in my mind. Cold as the ice house set into the grounds of the summer palace, it was the frozen heart of the castle, from which everything radiated. The closer you were to it, the colder you felt. The closer to the walls, the more sunshine soaked in. Though it made no sense, the thick stone walls of the castle should have been the coldest thing. At one end were the doors we had entered through, 2 stories high and as thick as my body. At the other, a grand staircase sweeping up to the double doors that the witch had disappeared through on our arrival. On close inspection, the staircase was rickety and eaten through by woodworm. Several steps were too badly rotted that they crumbled under my weight. I don't know how the witch dared mount them, but I avoided them entirely, finding my way up by the spiral staircases and servant stairs. And all around the hall's high walls, the rotting tapestries. When I looked closer, I saw the depicted battles, great hordes of soldiers in armor, dragons rearing over mountain tops, and all of it drenched in blood, limbs mangled, heads rolling on the ground. The red thread had darkened to rust and was wet with damp. I touched my fingers to it, and they came away stained claret. I found myself avoiding the hall, if I could. The next landmark was the tower. Standing at the western corner of the schloss, the witch's tower was the void in my internal map. Like the coat of arms hacked off my chimney breast, the tower could only be known from the edges it left behind, a bulging wall that disturbed the dimensions of the other rooms, corridors that ended in smooth walls, a mystery whose solution was carefully guarded from my sight. The rest of the castle I picked off piece by piece, rooms stuffed with junk and broken furniture, collapsing walls and smashed windows, moss growing between the stones, and always a dripping sound I could never quite find. I never saw another living soul, save the rats that scurried in the dark corners, and the pigeons roosting on the vaulted roof of the hall. I assumed, I hoped, that Wolf and the other servants were in the kitchens, keeping to themselves. In one grand room I thought might have been a dining hall, I found a portrait that had been slashed through with a knife so badly it was impossible to pull it back together. Like the shattered coat of arms in my room, I traced my finger over the remains of oil paint, so old it fractured like mosaic. Everywhere shadows, pools of ink gathering at the edges of rooms, encroaching from the corner of my eye, darker than any shadow had the right to be. There was something wrong with the castle. The room next to my own was the only door I could not force. The handle simply didn't turn, and no amount of wrenching moved it. I knelt and looked through the keyhole, and saw a space much like my own, a sliver of bed, and perhaps something that could be a desk. I gave the handle one last rattle, then gave up, and continued along the corridor. I stopped in one room populated by travelling cases of varying ages, 7 in total, ranging from a smartly painted trunk, like the one my mother had kept her winter clothes in, to something so solid and ancient it looked like a fallen tree trunk, studded with pointed metal rivets and bound in iron. I frowned, thinking of the age of some of the trunks and who they could have belonged to, and shut the door. I came across the witch's apartments, quite by accident. Set in an unassuming swatch of second-floor corridor to the west, where the windows faced a thick hatch of trees on mountainside, and the light never really reached, there was a study, like to my father's, as the oak was to the acorn. It was vast, a palace of books and rugs and chairs, a huge globe in one corner, so old half the world was missing, a fireplace blazing, and a chaotic desk the size of my bed covered in broken quills, crumpled blotting paper, spilled ink, yellowing newspapers, and a large paperweight in the shape of a clawed foot, clutching a nub of bone. There was no sign of the witch, but surely these must be her rooms. Through a connecting door I spied a bedroom, but knew better than to pry that far. Wolf arrived holding a small bundle of letters, and I bolted with an apology. But my curiosity had been lit. The witch was something like human, there was proof. She slept and spilled her ink and got cold without a fire. That thought comforted me. She couldn't be so completely alien, and if only I could find the right way in, there might be a way to live together. If only my curiosity had stopped there. Some secrets aren't worth the pain of knowing. I slept poorly, kept awake by the howling of wolves, the groan and creak of the old building shifting. I had still not been summoned by the witch, and Wolf had said precisely 3 words to me when bringing a tray of breakfast to my room, so I was acting entirely on my own initiative as I presented myself at the witch's study the next morning, hoping to make a good impression. I was mistaken. The door was open when I arrived, so I knocked on the door frame and waited on the threshold. The witch started at the noise, and on seeing my presence, her beautiful face fell into its habitual sneer. I arranged myself into a smile in return. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "Good morning. I thought to present myself early and see how I could be of use to you." "Of use to me?" "Yes." I had trapped myself with her, and I was determined this would be a different life than the one I had with my family. I pressed on. "You were insistent on taking a companion, so surely there are things you want from me. I trust you don't mind me speaking frankly. We were bound, and now I'm yours. Is that not so?" "It is." She looked pale, and that note of fear had returned to her disposition. It baffled me. What could she have to fear in me? I almost felt angry. How dare she be afraid when I was the one so vulnerable? "It would make things easier if you gave me your name," I said. We had always spoken of her as the witch, but if we were to live together, I needed to make her something different than the legend who kept us bound to fear. Her lip curled. "Of course it would. That's the most important thing to girls like you, isn't it? Etiquette and niceness." I shriveled. If I were at home, I would have slithered away by now, disappeared into the trees, or shut myself away with my collection. But I was far from home, and my old self felt distant. I see nothing wrong with wanting to be thoughtful and considerate in my dealings with others. Perhaps that is an alien idea to you, but so be it. If you will not tell me your name, then I shall call you the witch." The witch said nothing. Her lip was still curled, but now in amusement, not contempt. "Very well, that can be my name to you," she said, and went back to the letter she was writing. A moment of silence passed, and I realized she meant to dismiss me. At this point, my irritation with her was passing into genuine confusion. What was I doing here? I gestured at the chaos of papers on her desk and thought of that stinging moment of miscommunication with my father. "Can I help you with your accounts?" She didn't look up. "No." "Then perhaps I could play you music?" I looked around but saw no piano, the only instrument I had any acquaintance with. "That will not be necessary." With the last of my courage, I entered the room and placed myself before her desk. "You bound me, you brought me here, and now you ignore me? Why? If you don't tell me what I'm here for, how am I ever meant to help you achieve it? Tell me, what did your previous companions do?" I thought she might rage at me. Anger snapped through her like wind in a flag, and her fingers clenched around her pen. "You're here because I require you to be here. That is all you need to know." Her voice was calm and cold, frighteningly so. "Any further curiosity on your part is of no interest to me. Do not think to pry into my business behind my back, because I assure you I will know, and if I find out, I will make my displeasure known swiftly and with no remorse. Do I make myself clear?" For the first time, I saw something old behind her eyes. I saw the ancient witch of the wild wood looking out at me from behind a pretty porcelain mask. An instinct deep within me sensed danger, just as I had in my father's study when she had first come to us. I felt as though my guilt was writ clear on my face. I'd already snuck through the cast exploring. Did she know? My own death hung on the horizon, prickingly close. I swallowed and stepped back, making it all the way to the door without turning my back on her. "Very well, I won't bother you again." I should have fled then. Instead, I lingered in the corridor, at a loss for what to do next. Without the witch, I had no purpose here, and that thought loomed before me like a cliff edge. If I fell, surely I would die. The door to her study opened, and I hastily concealed myself in an alcove housing a grandfather clock. The witch emerged, brows furrowed in thought, and drew a key on a length of cord from beneath her bodice, and unlocked a plain door beside hers. I caught the flash of spiral stairs, and then the door swung shut and she was gone, the sound of a lock turning like the final punctuation at the end of our altercation. Cautiously, I crossed to the door and placed my hand against the wood. The witch's tower, the only place she had forbidden me to enter. I took the stairs to my room, thinking about the words that had caused her to lash out. She didn't want me to know about my predecessors. She had been furious, but I thought perhaps I had seen something more. She felt guilty. I feared what would come if I found out why. Living in the Schloss was like going back in time, like picking through the layers of striated cliffside, marking earthquake and landslide and drought and flood. The Schloss was an archaeological dig through decades, centuries of domestic life. I found Wolf in the kitchen, cooking over an open fire, no range in sight, and a thatch of copper pots hung from the ceiling between the foliage of drying herbs and ropes of sausage and garlic and paprika peppers and swags of thyme and rosemary and basil and mint. It was beautiful, but it was like something out of a woodblock carving in a children's book. The woodsman's cottage, the fairy tale kitchen. Wolf waved me out with the same lack of interest she would wafting out a fly. Two village girls assisted her, and neither acknowledged my presence. The rest of the castle was the same. Of course I'd expected the Schloss not to be on the gas or have a flush toilet, but this was something else. My bed, on inspection, was a proper tester, with layers of mattress ranging from pea shuck at the base, to straw, to horsehair, and then the newest layer of feather. Below it was rocked with pegs to tighten. The bath, when it was brought to me, was a vast wooden thing like a barrel split open, tarred and held together by ornately wrought metal bands, and filled with buckets of water heated in the kitchens. Rush lights lined the hallways, and wood smoke came from a fireplace, and yet I saw servants rarely. There were the maids in the kitchen, and the girls who came to help me dress most mornings, but I never saw the same face twice, and too often when I spoke to them, they drifted past as though I were the unseen ghost haunting the castle, their eyes glassy and vacant. The more I thought about my situation, replaying the scenes in my mind like a magic lantern show, the witch arrives, the daughter sacrificed, the offer accepted, the women bound, the more questions I had. I had seen the witch from my window on occasion, drifting down the road that led back to the village, veil over her face and long skirts dragging. It shouldn't have shocked me to see that she was no real monster, but I confess it did. She looked young, yes, but not quite as young as me. Perhaps Joanna's age. That brought strangeness with it again. A woman, unmarried, without children, living alone, riding where she wished in her carriage, and making demands of my father. It didn't fit with the world I knew, but to look for answers would be to risk more than I could afford to lose. I ventured outside instead, following the path from the castle I believe must lead to the village. It was strange, from Blumwald, the witch's castle was always visible on the horizon, jutting out from the trees like a snapped bone. But now I was here, Blumwald was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps it was some odd trick of perspective, but I could catch no glimpse of my old home. There were only the mountains, and the pines, and the river. The snow still held off, but it loomed in the heavy, brittle clouds as an ever-present threat, and the air was so sharp it felt like pins against my face and in my throat. I relished it. Something truly alive, distractingly so. The more time I spent alone in the castle, the more I felt one of the dusty, cobweb pieces of furniture abandoned decades past. I longed to be back in my forest, to feel the cold and wind and rain like a second skin. I followed the track that twisted around the spur of rock the castle sat on down into the valley. At one bend, I caught sight of the tower and its window, and saw a face. The witch was watching me. At first I thought I had taken the wrong path. There was no sign of life, only the trees weaving together overhead, in a barren winter canopy, and then a few steps in the forest broke apart, and I found myself in the village. Sunlight prickled through the mist, the horizon lost in a dense mesh of forest. I knew the maps of Schwarzstein in more detail than most, and the witch's castle was marked on none of them. No surprise, then, that neither was this lost village. Wolf had told me that unwanted visitors couldn't find their way to it, and I had no struggle to believe it. I threaded along the packed dirt street, passing tightly nestled houses with gabled roofs and fronts painted in blues and pinks and yellows, metal hanging signs marking the baker and butcher, the ironmonger and seamstress. The road opened out into a square with a horse through in the centre, the squat church on one side, and on the other I recognized the inn that the witch and I had stayed in the night before our arrival. On the far side, the road we had come from disappeared into a blur, slipping in and out of focus. I thought of the stories of grieving mothers and abandoned fiancés trying to follow the man taken by the witch, how every road would bend away from her castle, and they found themselves back where they started. Today the village was not quite so completely as empty as the inn had been, but I seemed to be the only person walking the street. Instead, life seemed to be behind rapidly closing shutters, children snatched back from doorways. I went to the church, thinking of the candles lit at the saints' altars, and my mother's stone casket. The doors were locked, so I walked around the graveyard looking for the names of the past companions. Hessler, 50 years before me, Hilkenborg before that, Frenzen, Danne, Lotterer, Rosberg, Sauber. But there were no graves bearing their names. Brow furrowed in confusion, I walked the stones anyway, reading the names and dates. Beloved mothers, devoted daughters. My predecessors hadn't simply disappeared. I had found 7 trunks in that room, stretching 400 years into the past. I left the churchyard for the bakery. 7 men, at least, had reached the castle. I had a purse of coins with me, so I opened the door of the Bäckerei Walter and joined the women buying their morning bread. It was the only place that seemed occupied. A narrow space with wrecks of dense pumpernickel, rounds of farm bread, small pebbles of milk rolls, and slabs of rye. At the back, a discard basket of burned loaves. Good morning. Several nervous glances were exchanged before the woman behind the counter said, Good morning. Can I help you? Please finish serving. I gestured to the woman who had arrived before me. Another flurry of glances. That's no problem. Let me get you what you want, and you can be on your way. I ordered a piece of poppy seed cake, not knowing what else to do. Do you supply bread to the castle? I asked. No. The woman took my money and handed me the cake. I arrived only last week. There are many things I'm not yet familiar with. We know who you are, Fräulein. You know, I am the companion? I changed my mind at the last moment from mentioning the witch. Is there anything else I can help you with? She said firmly, ignoring my question. Not from the bakery, thank you, but I would be grateful if you could help me with a few questions I have. If you know who I am, perhaps you know those who came before me. Another customer interrupted at this point, putting herself between me and the baker. We don't have anything to do with the castle, if we can help it. Young people go up there to work, and you think you've been there a day, but you come back and a whole month of your life has been gobbled up. You've made your purchase, so you'll be glad to be on your way, she said, an instruction, not a suggestion. Quite right you are. A hand touched my arm, and it was Wolf steering me out. We'll be off now, thank you, Frau Walter. She didn't let go until we'd cleared the village, and were climbing the road to the castle. Wolf looked distracted, eyes darting behind us. I felt a sense of more scurried movement somewhere out of sight, and a fluck of irritation marred my mood. Should you be so far from the castle, my lady? Said Wolf. Am I not allowed to walk where I please? Indeed you are, but the path can be treacherous. The weather changes quickly. I haven't seen the village since I first passed through it. If this is to be my new home, I thought I should get to know it a little better. Of course, my lady. I didn't know how to ask what I wanted to. The moment in the bakery made 3 times I had asked about the previous companions, and 3 times I had been rebuffed. How long have you served at the Schloss? I asked as we curved the final bend in the road and the castle came into view. Many years now. Did you know the witch was as a girl? A trick question, and Wolf skirted around answering. I have been here most of my life. Who lived in the castle before the witch? It seems a grand place for one person. Things don't change much around here, you'll find. I thought there might be a family mausoleum connected to the church, but I didn't see anything. Does the witch's family have their own chapel in the castle? Wolf didn't reply. My mind snagged on thoughts of the witch. The burned loaves and bakery had reminded me of her awful, unshod feet, dirty and crusted and bare to the world, like an animal, something beyond the boundaries of society. A mist had rolled in, half obscuring the bridge over to the spur of rock, and we walked on in faith alone. I tried one more time. I thought I might see the names of the previous companions. I pressed my question. They have no grave, my lady. A crow burst from the tree line in a flurry of glossy black feathers and claws. Wolf continued. Will you be wanting something to warm you up? I'll have tea sent to your room. I'm quite warm. I only want to know what I'm doing here, I snapped. I was shocked at my own boldness. Day by day, I had felt myself changing. Being snatched from familiar surroundings had left my outline ragged and unformed, as though I could unravel into someone entirely different. The witch won't tell me, you won't either, and the people in the village think I'm some bad omen come to curse them. The witch doesn't even seem to want me here, so I don't understand why she was so insistent on bringing someone. Is it me? Am I doing something wrong? My voice faltered. Curls of mist lingered on the cobbles of the courtyard, and the castle rose up above me, silent and cold and impossible. The mistress will make it clear to you when you need it. For a fraction of a second, Wolf softened. Something human came into her face. Take my advice. Stop rushing for something that will come soon enough. Enjoy your time. She went inside, and I lingered by the door. Wolf had given me a series of frustrating non-answers, but the more she spoke, the more an idea had coalesced. Something dark lurked in that castle, beyond the darkness of the witch. I had suspected it from the strangeness of the building, the decay, the shadows deep despite the midday sun, and the witch's own peculiar behaviors, fossilized in years alone under some great pressure of which she wouldn't speak. Perhaps I should do as both Wolf and the witch had said, and leave the past alone. I had no interest in digging into my own, so perhaps I had to leave the witches alone too. But something else had stayed with me. Wolf had said, enjoy your time. My mind supplied the rest of the sentence. While you can.